Flaminio, president of Mathematical Physiology Group. And now he present with actually a well-known logical community. However, because this community changing during the time, we can hear a lot of interesting details. Please, Tommaso.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just prepared. Well, thank of course, Jean-Yves and all the organizers for inviting us to present our community, the mathematical physiology community that now we are coordinating with myself and Luis Godo and Amanda Vidal from the Artificial Intelligence Research Institute in Barcelona. So before presenting the EUSFLAT working group on mathematical physiology, let me briefly tell you what mathematical physiology is. It can be, and it's actually regarded as a subdiscipline of mathematical logic that aim at studying the formal logical system that arise from Zadek fuzzy set theory that was actually introduced in 1968. So in a sense, you can think of mathematical fuzzy logic as something that is in the intersection of mathematical logic and fuzzy set theory. In a broad sense, mathematical fuzzy logic is what you obtain if you replace the two valued set of classical logic for true and false, 0 and 1, by the real unity interval 0, 1. So exactly as fuzzy set theory as a graded membership function that says if an element partially belongs to a set, here in mathematical fuzzy logic, what you can do is to evaluate formulas, not just in true or false or 0, 1, but in any real element of the real unity interval 0, 1 in principle. The starting step for, I mean, although the basic ground for mathematical fuzzy logic actually was put even before Zadek fuzzy set theory, because in fact there are papers that start introducing many valued logic, but in this particular sense, even in the 50s of the last centuries, but also before. For instance, Lukasiewicz papers in 1930 something was introducing the three-valued logic that now is known as the three-valued Lukasiewicz logic. We decided, in a sense, to fix the starting date of mathematical fuzzy logic as a discipline when actually, in particular, these three books were published. So in the late 90s of the last centuries, the beginning of the 21st century. The first one, of course, is Mathematical Fuzzy Logic by Petr Hayek. The second one is Mathematical Principle of Fuzzy Logic by Vilém Novák, Irina Perfileva, and of course, other authors. And the third one is the monograph by Sigrid Goldwald, the treatise on many valued logics. So what that books actually started is this discipline that now studies this bunch of logics. If you imagine here classical logics, if you have classical logic here on top, then during the first years in which the community of mathematical fuzzy logic start producing results, many other logics were introduced and studied. And now, for instance, we know that the weakest one is this MTL that was introduced by Francesca Esteva and Luis Godo in 2001, but also other logic like BL, for instance, which is here, that was introduced before by Petr Hayek, but other logical systems like Lukasiewicz logic, for instance, that was introduced even before in the 30s, or Gödel logic that can be regarded as the preliminary extension of intuitionistic logic. What it means that is the logic whose algebraic semantics are Heyting algebras and where the important algebras are totally ordered, can be recovered in a sense in this bigger framework. So at the beginning, what we start studying was how, I mean, the general question was how many logical systems we can define in this more general framework, and what kind of general completeness we can prove with respect to the supposed set of truth values, which is the real unity interval 0, 1. And of course, there were also introduced proof systems, also connection with other branches of logic and mathematics. And this, in a sense, defined the first steps that were moved in this direction. current developments of these disciplines, of course, encompasses foundational aspects like fuzzy class theory, so a kind of generalization of set theory, fuzzy mathematics, fuzzy type theory, algebraic semantics, which is indeed, it has been one of the core areas in which mathematical fuzzy logicians have worked in the last years, because of course the connection with real numbers is very strong in this sense. So developing algebraic structures based on real numbers allowed us also to understand what kind of properties the logic had, and many other areas like fuzzy model theory that in fact was introduced by Chang and Kiesler under the name of continuous model theory in 1958, I guess, or something like that. And many other topics like fuzzy quantifiers, which will be, for instance, the topic that Petra will show us today, studying this graded square of opposition. And then proof theory, modalities, what fuzzy modal logics are, for instance, connection with uncertainty theories, like what is probability theory when you replace classical logic by other fuzzy logics. And more recently, there is a very promising stream of investigation that try to understand up to which extent the areas of artificial intelligence can be captured in this area, in particular knowledge representation from one side, but also what is called here differentiable fuzzy logic is a kind of fuzzy logical system that allows to integrate knowledge representation in machine learning, for instance, and of course, philosophical aspect of the discipline. So after the first publication, then we managed to publish 3 volumes of the Handbook of Mathematical Fuzzy Logic, edited by Patterson, Peter Hayek, Carles Noguera, and Christopher Mueller from 2011 to 2016. And of course, in 2007, we actually managed to make the EOSFLAT, so the European Society for Fuzzy Logic and Technology, to recognize us as an official working group of that society. What we do, we have a biannual official conference, which is LATD, Logic, Algebra, and Truth Degrees. Of course, we are organizing special session, of course, in the EOSFLAT conference, because we are part of it, but also in the Squaro conference, the Fuzzy IEEE, and many others, and special issue in international journals like soft computing, symmetry, or fuzzy sentence systems. I mean, the journals which are closer to our community. We count around 150 members in 23 countries, and here I tried to points in which countries we are more present. Of course, Europe is the part of the world in which we are more present, but also in North America, South America, and also in Asia or Australia. So more infos can be found in our website that have been updated, because actually we didn't update it since some months. Now it's more or less updated. And that's all. So thank you very much, and enjoy Petra's talk.
Thank you, Tommaso.
Thank you, Tommaso. Your questions, colleagues, please. Are there any questions to Tommaso?
I have only an observation.
Yes,
for
please.
technical issues, we only see the first slide, not the other ones.
You couldn't see the other?
Yes, only the first slide with the title.
I can send the slides to you, or maybe I can upload the slides in our website. If you Google mathematical fuzzy logic, you will get our website, or I can repeat everything from zero if you want, but maybe it's not convenient for.
I have a question.
Sure.
Please, Alexei.
So you do not distinguish fuzzy logic from multi-valuable logics?
From, sorry?
You do not distinguish between fuzzy logics and multiple or many valued logics.
Yes, actually,
There is no distinction in your presentation.
No, in the presentation,
Why?
I didn't have time to enter into the details of the distinction between fuzzy and many valued logic, for example. But of course, there is a very, well, there is a way to distinguish them. Is quite easy because indeed what we require in fuzzy logic is that truth values are comparable, meaning that for instance, in algebraic terms, the variety of algebras that we study, in this variety, the subdirectly reducible elements must be totally ordered. So they are chains, right? So in other terms, what we want is that whenever you evaluate two formulas, you can always say if one formula has a bigger truth value than the other or not.
So what made the idea of fuzzy logicians to think that truth values are comparable?
Exactly.
Why? I know that there was not a logician, but why logicians call fuzzy logic? The truth values are comparable, well, they're continuous, infinitely many, but you can create infinite structure of values where you have not comparable values.
Yeah, sure. You can do it.
Do you think it's realistic to have comparable values in like a general sense?
I mean, I think that the fact that we want truth values to be comparable has some historical justification, because if you start from Zadek's set theory, actually he was using
but this is a very strong restriction.
Well, but the nice part is that you can capture the linearity of truth values just by adding a single axiom, which is also quite natural in the logic, which is prelinearity. If you put the axioms x implies y or y implies x, then you get prelinearity for free. However, our community also studied generalization of fuzzy logic in this narrow sense, so to say, removing this axiom and see what happens, for instance. For instance, there are a bunch of papers that study what are called GBL algebras, or the logic of generalized BL logic of Hayek, in which you exactly remove that axiom. And it is closer, what you get is something which is closer to intuitionistic logic. It's like a many-valued version of intuitionistic logic, because you don't have totally ordered algebras anymore. You just have full Hating algebras in that sense. And it's exactly what you get if you add prelinearity to Hating algebras, you get again Boolean algebras. So it's a quite fundamental axiom, and it's easy to express in our language just by the residuum, the implication. But I mean, just make a choice.
Yes.
Your question, please.
Yeah.
Please.
So can I? Moment. Just moment. Yeah. I can't. Yeah. Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible? Okay. Yeah. I am Mihir Chakraborty. I am connected with this business for a long time, and I can say a little bit about the earlier question about linearity. In my opinion, linearity is too restrictive. It may give good mathematical results, but from the standpoint of logic, from the standpoint of philosophy, linearity is not a very good choice. But anyway, my point is different. We are doing something right from the beginning, from about 1986 onwards. What we call a theory of graded consequence. So here we have a book. Perhaps you know, there are some publications also. This is something parallel to what is now called mathematical fuzzy logic. So it is running parallel. It has overlap, but it's parallel. I would like to know from you any opinion regarding the comparison between mathematical fuzzy logic and the theory of graded consequence? If you can say anything about that, I will be really happy.
Well, let me just say one thing, because in fact, what is so to say strange in mathematical fuzzy logic, or in fuzzy logic in general, when you do logic, is that we still use, well, all the logical systems that I presented before, starting from MTL, arriving to Lukasiewicz logic or Gödel logic. The designated truth value for theorems is 1, right? So there is no greatness in the consequence relation of the logic. However, there are several papers that I think could be compared with what you have in mind, I guess. I think they've been published. They start publishing this kind of paper, I think like 10 years ago. In particular, the group of Barcelona, they studied another consequence relation which is graded. And the idea is that you can deduce something, phi deduce psi, if under every evaluation, the evaluation of phi is less or equal than the evaluation of psi. Then you don't need 1 as designated value for theorems, for instance, or for deductions. And this logic has been axiomatized, they've been studied, and now we speak about the less or equal companion of each logic. And I think that is the topic that could be compared with what you were suggesting, and there could be surely an interesting connection between the two things.
Can I just continue a little more? As I understand, I mean, this graded consequence, in the theory of graded consequence, really the consequence operator is fuzzy.
Yeah.
But in mathematical fuzzy logic, you have a fuzzy premise, you have a fuzzy conclusion, but the consequence relation is not fuzzy.
Yes, exactly. This is what I was.
Yeah. Yes. So this is the main difference, and I would like to see some consequences of this idea of making the inference relation itself fuzzy in the general framework of uncertainty, handling uncertainty or whatever. So, yeah.
Yes, if you, I can send you by email some papers that I think that goes in the direction of making the concept, the logical relation graded.
And they are necessarily the truth set. I mean, there are two truth sets, one for the object level formulae and the other for the meta level sentences. And there are some relationship between the two sets. And there we do not necessarily require linearity.
Yeah. Yes, that's interesting. If you want to, if you could point me to that papers or books, I would be happy to have a look at that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Are there further questions, or we can stop this introduction? Oh, Alexei, please, your question.
As far as I remember, so you define the operations on the closed interval from 0 to 1, and connectives should be continuous, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, the requirement, the unique requirement we put is that from the operation of what for instance, in substructural logic is called fusion. So the T-norm that models, in a sense, the strong conjunction connective, you can define mathematically the implication, which is the residuum.
No, I'm talking about the connectives. I'm talking about connectives.
Yeah. I'm going that direction. I mean, the unique condition you need for the strong conjunction to define the implication is that it is left continuous. So of course, if the strong conjunction is continuous, you define the implication, which is not continuous in general. For instance, in the case of Gödel logic, you have a continuous conjunction, but a discontinuous implication. But in fact, you can make left continuous even the strong conjunction, and you still are able to define the residuum, so the implication.
Well, my question is, how will your theory change if instead of interval from 0, 1, you will take any topological compact, a compact set?
Yeah.
Yes, in general, topological space, or in a particular topological space like Hausdorff and other spaces, how will the theory change? Will it be the same, or will be some difficulties?
I have no idea on how it can change, but it is surely interesting to. It is something that could be investigated for sure.
Okay, we are discussing 15 minutes, and suppose that at this moment we can stop this introductory discussion and pass to the second item of our program, namely to the talk of Petra Murinová, which is titled Graded Structures of Opposition in Fuzzy Natural Logic. Please, Petra. Oh, we cannot hear you.
You muted.
Now we can see your slides, but we don't hear you.
She has to unmute herself.
Your microphone is off.
You muted.
Petra, please switch on your microphone. No, you have a microphone on the left corner of your screen. Okay. No, we still cannot hear you. No, it looks so that Petra's microphone is on, but we still cannot hear Petra.
Now, yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, now,
Yes,
okay.
now it works?
Yes.
It works, yes.
Yes. Yes, I don't know where was problem. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for my introduction, and thank you very much for my invitation to present my results, which relate to results which were published in journal Logical I cannot now remember the name of journal, Logical Universalis, yes. So, title of my presentation is Graded Structures of Opposition in Natural Logic, and because I have some problem, I don't know what, I cannot share my computer, I will ask to share and to, I will cooperate with our technical support, and I will ask her let's continue or next slide. So we can start, please. So there is outline of my presentation. I will start with classical structures of opposition. I think, or I hope that everybody knows Aristotle square. Also, I recall Patterson square, and also I recall cubes of opposition and classical logic. Then I will continue with mathematical definitions of generalized intermediate quantifiers, which are based of evaluated linguistic expressions. And the main part of these presentations consists of graded structures of opposition. Mainly I will explain you graded Aristotle square as well as its extension, graded Patterson square, and at the end of this presentation we will interested in graded Patterson cube of opposition. Okay, next slide. Classical Aristotle square is formed by four basic statements. We are working with two universal quantifiers. We work with positive and negative statement, and also we work with a particular quantifier as well as in universal approach. We work with positive and negative sentences. Next slide. So as I recall, we are working with affirmative and negative statements, and these statements are denoted by usual letters. Next slide. We will work with basic properties which define classical as well as generalized square and cubes of oppositions. It means we are speaking about properties of contraries, contradictories, subcontraries, and subalterns. Next slide. We can see here a classical Aristotle square. I think that everybody knows how this square looks like. Below here, I recall or remember some kind of papers when we can find more details about this square. Next slide. If we are working with Aristotle square in first order predicate logic, we can transform Aristotle square and we can define our sentences, positive and negative sentences, using these mathematical formulas. We know that the very important role plays here existential import. It means we have to suppose that our subject formula is non-empty. It means we are working here with this special formula which represents our existential import. More details can be also found, for example, in this paper. So next slide. So here we can see classical definitions of main properties which form a classical Aristotle square of opposition. It means we are speaking about properties contradictory, contrary, subcontrary, and subaltern. I think that I cannot go to detail. I think that these definitions are very known. So we can go next slide. Here we can see some example of Aristotle square which was presented by Professor Beziau in his paper. And we can see that, for example, positive universal quantifier is contradictory with the quantifier with particular negative quantifier. Next slide. Here is another type of example which was also presented by Professor Beziau, and more details about this square can be found in this paper. Next slide. So to generalize or to extend Aristotle square of opposition and to define a Patterson square of opposition, it means at first we have to define or explain intermediate quantifiers. Intermediate quantifiers belong to the group of generalized quantifiers, and these quantifiers are special fuzzy quantifiers. At this moment, now we are speaking about classical quantifiers, of course, are special quantifiers of natural language. Below here we can see some examples of intermediate quantifiers. For example, quantifiers, a little, several, few, most, many, almost all, and many other examples of these quantifiers. What is important is that these quantifiers lay between classical quantifiers. It means between classical quantifiers, between universal and particular quantifiers. Here we can observe some kind of examples of sentences which we will be interested below. We can see, for example, a very nice book of Patterson, where Patterson presented results about intermediate quantifiers as well as about related logical syllogisms. Next slide. Here we can see a complete Patterson square of opposition. We can see that Patterson square of opposition is based on 5 basic intermediate quantifiers. We can observe that, for example, the quantifier almost all is contradictory with the quantifier many. And of course, classical quantifiers, particular and universal, fulfill the property of contradictory. We can observe, for example, that the quantifier almost all with the quantifier several here is contrary, as well as the quantifier which is defined by positive sentences by most as are P with most as are not P. This position means that these two quantifiers are also contrary. Next slide. Now let's continue, and now question is how to construct a cube of opposition. It means, recall that classical Aristotle square of opposition works with universal and particular quantifiers. And if we want to study a cube of opposition, it means we change a subject formula and predicate formula to the negation, and we can start, or we can define the second phase or the second square of opposition, which can be also defined using mathematical formulas. Next slide. Below, I introduce here mathematical definitions of new square of opposition. Of course, we have to assume that our new formulas are non-empty. It means the corresponding classical set are not empty. It means we have to assume, similarly as in Aristotle's square of opposition, some kind of existential import. Next slide. Here we can observe, for example, Moretti's cube of opposition. I will not too detail about this cube because I think that more detail can be found, for example, in the paper of Didier Dubois, who presented a very nice paper, and also this paper was published in Logica Universalis, and here we can find more details about this cube. Next slide. I would like to recall that Moretti's cube of opposition is formed by 6 squares of opposition. Namely, here we can see how look these squares. Another kind of cube of opposition is Keynes cube of opposition, which consists only 4 squares of opposition. And also I would like to recall that Keynes cube of opposition is more general. More detail can be found, for example, in this paper. And we can find here also a graded version of this paper from Dubois et al. Point of view. Next slide. Here we can see how looks JK cube of opposition. I cannot to detail. I will be interested in graded approach of these structures in fuzzy natural logic. So next slide. So first of all, I would like to say you some motivation why we are interested in this approach. First of all, I think that it's very good to understand human reasoning. It means to understand natural language and to analyze, for example, natural data, or to infer new information from natural data, for example, using logical syllogisms. It means to obtain new information, for example, and to work with new kind of intermediate quantifiers which form graded cube of opposition is very interesting, and we will be interested in this approach. So we will be interested in these three main theories. We will interested in the theory of intermediate quantifiers, in the theory of syllogistic reasoning, and also in the graded approaches of mentioned logical structures. At this moment, I will be interested in the mathematical definition of intermediate quantifiers. Next slide. So, as I explained in the beginning of my presentation, intermediate quantifiers lay between classical quantifiers, and let me recall that generalized fuzzy quantifiers, it means mainly intermediate quantifiers, were proposed by Wilhelm Novak from mathematical point of view, and he introduced the first version of mathematical definition of these quantifiers. I will explain this definition later. So next slide. So first of all, we start, or I would like to explain the motivation how we can, or how we define, or how we introduce a mathematical definition of intermediate quantifiers in our approach. Assume, for example, this example, some kind of quantifier, small children like chocolate. It means question is how we can find set or fuzzy sets. Assume that the fuzzy set B here represents small children, and how we can find some kind of subset which represents, for example, the quantifier almost, and etc. Of course. So at first we have to characterize the size of a given fuzzy set using specific measure at first, and then we use some kind of evaluative linguistic expression which is based on concrete evaluative linguistic expression. Finally, we use general or existential quantifier, of course, similar and in classical approach. You will see detail in next slide. Next slide, please. So I very briefly recall a theory of evaluative linguistic expressions. Evaluative linguistic expressions are, for example, expression extremely big, roughly big, medium, or very small, extremely small, and many others examples we can find. We are working with trichotomy of evaluative linguistic expressions, which are modifying some kind of linguistic hedges. We are working with hedges which have narrowing effect and also with widening effect. Below here, we can see the picture where we can observe that, for example, a fuzzy set which represents the evaluative linguistic expressions small is this kind of example. And for example, if we use special linguistic hedge, we can define, or we can find fuzzy sets which represent evaluative linguistic expression very small. Similarly, we can define, or we can find fuzzy sets for the evaluative linguistic expression which are based on expression big. Next slide. So first of all, I would like to recall that our measure which is used in our mathematical definition is normalized. It means we obtain a degree or values between 0 and 1. Also, we assume that our measure requires monotonicity property. It's a very typical property for measure. And also our measure is close to negation. Below, I introduce some kind of example of measure. Next slide. Here we can see that we can define a measure, for example, by this equation where cardinality of the measure is defined by this equation. It's a very simple definition and very obvious definition. Next slide. So, first of all, I would like to a little bit recall first definition. It means in our approach, it was possible to use or to define fuzzy set Z, which defines our quantifier. It was possible to work with arbitrary fuzzy subset of our support. And it was a problem because we can see or we can observe this example. Assume that we are working with fuzzy sets of smokers where some element or some person is smoker in the degree 0.6. And it was possible to take this element, for example, in the degree 0.4, but it was problem because from a smoker, it isn't normal, yes? It means we define new operation, next slide, we define cut on a fuzzy set, which is defined by this property. It means in our new definition, it isn't possible to change degrees. And it was idea to use this special operation in our definitions. So many details can be found in this paper, which was published in Fuzzy Sets and Systems. Next slide. So very briefly, I recall that our results are based on Lukasiewicz fuzzy type theory, which was constructed as a high order fuzzy logic based on standard Lukasiewicz MV algebra with delta operation. I recall that we are working with Lukasiewicz algebra based on interval 0,1. It means our delta operation can be defined by this equation. It means if A is equal something not to equal to 1, we obtain 0, and if A is equal 1, we obtain 1. Next slide. So, and now we are going into mathematical definitions. So, let us assume, for example, this example of sentences, positive sentences. Some kind of quantifier, young students are lazy. So, first of all, we somehow need to take part of our universe B. It means we define cut on fuzzy sets, which I recall you 2 slides ago, and we say that the elements which belong to this cut, which is fuzzy set, these elements have some property A. In our approach, the property A is to be lazy. Next slide. Then, as I explained in my motivation, I need to somehow measure this cut with respect to our universe. It means I use measure, and this value from interval 0,1, as I explained, is evaluated by some evaluated linguistic expression based on concrete example of intermediate quantifier. Next slide. And finally, I take the greatest part of our cut, which is constructed from our support. It means I use existential quantifier. Next slide. Here we can observe the list of several intermediate quantifiers which are defined using positive statement. It means, for example, we can observe that the quantifier almost all is defined using fuzzy sets, which must be extremely big with respect to our universe. Similarly, the quantifier most is defined using evaluated linguistic expression very big. It means fuzzy sets which represents the quantifier most is very big with respect to our universe B. So, similarly, we can define several examples of quantifiers, for example, quantifier many, few, several, and many other examples of quantifiers. Next slide. Similarly, we can define, next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Similarly, we can define negative statement. It means by putting negation in front of our property, we can define negative statements. So let's go to generalized definitions which form graded structures of opposition. First of all, there is definition of the property to be contrary. Here I recall classical definition of this property, and in our approach, this definition is defined using Lukasiewicz conjunction. It means we say that two formulas are contraries in our theory if its Lukasiewicz conjunction is equal to 0. It means in our model, it means that Lukasiewicz conjunction of both through degrees of both formulas is equal to 0. Next. Similarly, we can define the property of subcontrary here is the definition from classical point of view, and we say that two formulas are subcontraries in our theory if Lukasiewicz disjunction of these two formulas is concrete models is equal Lukasiewicz disjunction to 1. Next slide. Now, definition of contradictory. As you know, in classical approach, we can use internal and external negation. It's possible in classical logic because if we use negation in front of universal quantifier, we obtain the quantifier particular negation version. It means we can use this property, but in our approach it wasn't possible. It's a very important information because if we use negation in fuzzy approach, in Lukasiewicz approach, we obtain strong Lukasiewicz conjunction, but it isn't equal to classical operation. Next slide. It means it was motivation for us to use a delta operation. It means we say the two formulas are contradictory in our approach if Lukasiewicz disjunction and also Lukasiewicz conjunction is equal to 0 with delta operation, and also is Lukasiewicz disjunction is provable formula with delta operation. Next slide. And the last definition, next slide. So last definition of the property of subaltern is very easy. From classical approach, we say that the properties are, the property subaltern is fulfilled if the implication is probable. Here we can see graded Aristotle square of opposition. Here we can see that this graded square works similarly as in classical approach. It means, for example, here we can prove the property contradictory between these two quantifiers. And of course, and in classical approach, we have to assume existential import, but we are in fuzzy logic. It means fuzzy operations are assumed. Next slide. So now we start with graded Patterson square of opposition. We start with graded Aristotle square of oppositions, which are explained now in previous slides. Next slide. By extension, next slide. By extension of positive statements and also negative statements, we can construct a Patterson square of opposition in our approach. Next slide. Here we can observe properties between positive statements and negative statements which form quantifiers. Next slide. Here we can observe a classical property of contradiction. Now I would like to speak a little bit more about quantifier many, because this quantifier in our approach is defined using the fuzzy set not small. It means that we can observe here that, for example, if we are speaking or working with 100 people, it means 41 people, and as well as, for example, 60 people. This is example of the quantifier many. Next slide. It means in our approach, yes, I explained this just now. It means, next slide, that this quantifier in our approach behaves as subcontrary as well as contrary depending on its interpretation in a particular situation. It means that we can construct the model in which the quantifier behaves as contrary, and also we can find a model when this quantifier behaves as subcontrary. More details can be found in this paper because this paper is devoted only to results of the quantifier many. Next slide. So now let's go to start a graded cube of opposition as generalization of graded square. Similarly, as in classical approach, we replace our formulas by its negation, and it means we are working with 8 formulas and we are working with 2 squares of oppositions. It means we can construct graded of opposition and also its graded version from Patterson point of view. Next slide. Below, next slide. The definitions, it's very easy to understand. Here I introduce some kind of examples. If we are working with Aristotle square or with Patterson square, we are working with these sentences. For example, most answer. Similarly, most children who live in an area affected by heavy industry later suffer from asthma. Next slide. And here we can see new examples of sentences which are examples of the second phase of our graded Patterson cube. It means most people who don't smoke have higher lung capacity. It means we are working with negative expressions in antecedent. Next slide. So it means we define new definitions of intermediate quantifiers, new forms of these definitions by changing our support, its negation, and also we replace our formula A by its negation. It means we obtain new mathematical forms. Next slide. Next slide. So, and now we can start a square, and we are going from this square to graded Patterson cube. It means here we can see we are working with Patterson square. It means the classical Patterson square, and here we can start with new the second phase of Patterson square. Next slide. It means similarly we can prove basic properties between these intermediate quantifiers, similarly as in our first approach. It means we can syntactically prove, for example, that these new quantifiers fulfill the property of contrary. Similarly, we can prove other properties. Next slide. And finally, we can form a graded Patterson cube of opposition, and we can prove all properties. Syntactically, it means all properties fulfill in every model. Next slide. So yes, finally, we obtain also properties here.
I'm sorry, Petra, we don't hear you.
We don't hear, yeah.
Some problems with connection.
Yeah, I think she's frozen. I will write her an email and ask her to rejoin.
Okay, anyway, we are at the conclusion, so I take the opportunity to say that the next Congress on the Square will not be this year. We have to postpone it again. So it will be in 2022 in Belgium, in September 2022 in Leuven, Belgium. Everybody is welcome to join.
That is the problem, I think, yeah.
And the next session of the webinar will be next week at the same time with a Brazilian session. The people from colleague from Brazil will speak, and the Brazilian Society of Logic will be presented.
It is next week?
Yeah, next week, because we have two sessions. We have two sessions per month.
So same date and same day. That means Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday at the same schedule.
Okay.
Hey, Petra, do you hear us or not?
No, not yet. Shahid, may I ask about the Banaras event? Is it going to take place, or can you say? Many people are asking about this.
Yeah, good question. We have decided, in fact, yesterday to postpone it also in 2022. 2022, it will be November, at the beginning of November, 2022, from November 4 to November 8. Because as you know, the situation in India is not so good at this time, so we have to postpone it again also. I think we are hearing her now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Willem Novak, and I am the co-author of Petra's theory, which she presented. She has just called me because there is a big storm above Czech Republic, and unfortunately, this storm caused a break of connection. Therefore, she was not able to finish her talk, so she has to apologize for this inconvenience. Anyway, if you have some questions, I can answer these questions instead of her.
So please, colleagues, you may address your questions to William.
Yes.
Hello, Willem. Hi, how are you? Mihir here.
Hello, nice to see you. I see that you look very well and happy. So I hope that you avoided this terrible COVID.
Somehow avoiding, yeah. So can I ask one question then?
Yes.
What is so special about Lukasiewicz operators in this particular research of quantifiers?
What is the reason? The main reason is behavior of negation, because Lukasiewicz logic preserves the double negation and contraposition, and we need these operations when modeling behavior of our quantifiers. Without that, it wouldn't work. And moreover, I argue, I said it many times on many places, I am convinced that Lukasiewicz algebra and Lukasiewicz logic is the most convenient logic for modeling vagueness and for modeling natural language semantics, for modeling phenomena like these intermediate quantifiers. Till now, nobody convinced me that I am wrong.
Petra, would you like to add something to the answer?
Yes, thank you. I'm back. I had problem with connection. I hope that now it's working. I think that Professor Novak explained very well what our colleague asked. And I think that my presentation was at the end, and maybe I only conclude that we introduce mathematical definitions of intermediate quantifiers, and we propose graded structures of opposition in our approach. And our idea for future is to find algorithm for intermediate quantifiers and to analyze logical syllogisms using our proposing algorithms. I think that that's all. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your talk, Petra. Alexei, please, your question.
Yeah, it's not a question. I have two remarks. I think that, if I'm right, you share the term generalized quantifiers with Mostovsky, but not the content, only the term. Mm-hmm. The term generalized quantifiers was used by Mostovsky in the 1950s, but it's different. His was based on cardinalities.
Yes.
And your cardinality is not more than the cardinality of continuum.
Yes, yes, yes. You are right.
The second remark, delta operation on you had delta. Actually, it was used by Alex Sitkin in 1970s. He used such operation on Hoyting algebras. That's long ago. He used it in, and I saw since then other people used it.
I think that Professor Hayek also introduced this delta operation in his approach, and he works with, or he worked with this operation, and also.
It was later. It was later. His book
yes,
on,
of course.
on
yes,
fuzzy logic was published.
Yes, you are right. Yes, of course.
Professor Hayek refers to this as Bass delta. Matthias Bass, Austrian logician, he may use it earlier, but we, frankly speaking, didn't know about the man whom you know.
Alex Sitkin.
Alex Sitkin. We will have a look and compare who was the first.
It's just a remark. He used it long ago.
So far, you can find it in the literature about fuzzy logic under the term Bas delta. Matthias Bas.
Matthias Bas, yes.
If I can add something about the Bas delta,
Yeah.
actually nowadays it's also known under the name of Bas-Monteiro delta, because Professor Monteiro,
well, Monteiro maybe
did something similar for symmetric aiding
Monteiro,
algebras.
yeah, Monteiro could use
Symmetric aiding algebras.
yes.
Just a side
it seems to me you have also a question.
May I have a question?
Yes, please.
Well, I will switch on. I tried to switch on, yeah, so that you can see me. I'm Maria Duji. Petra, you mentioned that you work with evaluative expressions like small, big, strong, large, good, bad, etc. But what I did not understand, what I did not get, how do you work with them? Because actually these expressions denote property modifiers, because nobody and nothing is, say, absolutely small, absolutely big, absolutely good, absolutely bad. It's always with respect to some property. So that from the logical point of view, these expressions denote property modifiers. And I didn't get it. How do you work with these expressions in this fuzzy natural logic? And if I may, second, that's the main question. The second, just maybe I'm silly, but you mentioned intermediate quantifiers, generalized quantifiers, fuzzy quantifiers, positive quantifiers, negative quantifiers. So that I've got a mess a little bit with this terminology. In my opinion, there are no negative or positive quantifiers.
Yes, I agree with you. I know very well. And I think that at the beginning of my presentation, this morning, I changed your terminology in my presentation. Instead of positive quantifiers, today I was speaking about positive sentences,
Right,
which
define. But later on, yes, in the beginning, but later on you switch.
Maybe, yes, because it's my maybe natural mistake, or I don't know how it is explained.
Okay, that's just terminology.
Yes, terminology.
Intermediate, generalized, yes. And fuzzy.
Fuzzy. First of all, we have classical quantifiers. It means universal and particular. Yeah. Then we can extend these two classical quantifiers, and we are speaking about generalized quantifiers. And if we extend this approach into fuzzy approach, we are speaking about fuzzy generalized quantifiers. But it's very long sentences for me. Fuzzy generalized quantifiers and intermediate quantifiers are special group of generalized quantifiers, as well as fuzzy intermediate quantifiers are special group of fuzzy generalized quantifiers.
Okay, I still have a mess, but let it be.
Yes. And the second question, evaluative linguistic expressions. Because I have problem because I cannot share my computer, I don't know why, and I cannot now to you show once more mathematical definitions. As you remember, in our definition is formula which represents at first cut with respect to fuzzy, with respect to universum, and we calculate measure between these two fuzzy sets. We obtain value between 0, 1. We measure cut, it is fuzzy set, with respect to universum. And the second step, we obtain a value from the interval 0, 1, and we evaluate this value using evaluative linguistic expression. It means, for example, if I do obtain value of my measure, for example, 0.9, it means 0.9 in our approach is in using or applying evaluative linguistic expression extremely big, true in the degree, I think, 0. For example, 85. Now, because if I explain my presentation, our technical support switch my presentation when I have example of shapes of all evaluative linguistic expressions. It is yes, this was this slide. It was this slide. The second slide. Yes, this. Yes. No, back. Yes, this slide. This is okay. So if okay, no, okay. For example, here we can see fuzzy sets which represents our evaluative linguistic expression. It means if we obtain, for example, a measure which is equal to 0.91, then in evaluative expression very big, if we evaluate this measure in our quantifier most, because most is defined using very big, that it means we obtain true degree 1. It means if we are working it with 100 people, it means that 91 people represents the quantifier most, and it is true in the degree 1.
Petra, that's clear, but maybe that what my question is concerns something else. For instance, in this slide, extremely big, okay, but it's always with respect to something, and with respect to some property, and I'm not sure where that property is. Is it that cut in the previous slide, or you know what I mean? For instance, if Jumbo is a small elephant, he is still an extremely big animal or mammal. So that you would come to a contradiction that Jumbo is both small and big.
Maybe at this moment I cannot understand very well your question. I don't know.
My question concerns this, that these evaluative expressions denote, from the logical point of view, property modifiers. You know, for instance, John is a skillful surgeon or extremely skillful surgeon, but a completely unskillful painter, very bad painter. So that you always have to relativize that extremely big with respect to something, extremely small, extremely bad, you know, because nobody is absolutely good, absolutely bad, absolutely large. These evaluative, as you say, expressions denote modifiers that modify a property, so that you have to take into account with respect to which property is this or that extremely big. That's a question.
May I add something? I don't agree that the whole evaluative expression is a property modifier. We have developed, also together with linguists, a theory of these evaluative expressions. What we are working here can be classified as simple evaluative expressions. And these simple evaluative expressions are formed of adjective, which characterizes some property like big, small, and so on. And they can be modified by hedges, linguistic hedges. And so this is a modifier. And these curves, which are on this slide, are obtained by combination of a model of what does it mean, say, small, and how can it be modified by, for example, very extremely, and so on. Absolutely is also a modifier, linguistic hedge, which modifies the adjective big, for example. And this is not everything. What is important here, these expressions are pragmatic, and it means that they need context. So we can speak about small people, we can speak about small beetles, we can speak about small planets or small stars. And in each case, we are speaking about different sizes, small animal or big animal.
That's exactly the question, Willem. That's exactly the question.
And
Yes.
the context is included in our theory.
Yeah.
Petra didn't speak about it because we, in this, for example, in this picture, we reduce this into context which we call standard. It means it is reduced from 0 to 1.
1, yes.
But context we always represent by an interval in which there is also emphasized middle element. Here it is 0.5, but it doesn't need to be 0.5. Usually it should be something like 0.4, which corresponds to use of golden section, but this is another story. At any case, context is absolutely necessary. And also I would like to add something.
I agree
more.
with you, but how do you take into account that context? That's the question all the time.
Context is included in the theory. In formulas, we
and where is that context in that formula? Could you?
We are using formulas of two kinds. The first kind is simplified, where the context is always this standard context, and therefore it is not included, but it is not forgotten. And we have also other special formulas where the context explicitly occurs. By the way, I have published, it was in 2005 or when, I forgot, a paper on evaluative expressions, mathematical logical theory, and all formulas included context are there.
Okay, okay. Maybe
that's I think I even send it to you, or I can send it one day.
Okay. Thank you, Willem. Yeah, maybe, you know, it was my misunderstanding. I am not going to criticize. I just want to understand because...
Yes, of course. I don't blame you.
we come to the same problem from different points of view, in my opinion. And I believe that that there is a common point where we can meet. I just cannot find it. I couldn't find it in Petra's presentation.
It was not explicitly. By the way, the paper is here in this slide. It was published in 2008.
Okay, yes. Okay. I believe I do have it. I will look at it. Okay, thank you. 2008, and it's called Evaluative Linguistic Expressions.
A comprehensive theory of trichotomous evaluative linguistic expressions.
Okay.
Because we distinguish three division of universe into three, of course, vaguely delineated parts: small, medium, and big.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
You can take it as canonical words. Of course, we can replace them by any other words like shallow, intelligent, or whatever. There are thousands of such words.
Yeah, but okay, so that the last question, how do you avoid that contradiction that Jumbo is a small elephant and at the same time extremely large mammal, so that Jumbo is small and large?
Large what? Member, or what do you mean?
A large mammal or animal?
A mammal, yes, I see. Again, these are two different contexts.
Yeah, so that you cannot combine contexts, or you can.
Combine. Both are sentences which are expressed in different contexts. So
I agree. But how do you then evaluate so that you do not evaluate them together? Never.
This is the same like saying that somebody is big, and you mean that not only tall but also say stout. Again, yes. You have two dimensions, and each dimension is evaluated separately because it forms a different context.
Okay, so you always evaluate separately?
Yes,
okay.
From this point of view, yes.
Okay, thank you. That was a question. So in this way, you do avoid that paradox. Yeah.
Okay, colleagues, thank you for this discussion, but let me ask other colleagues, do you have further questions to Petra?
Sorry.
Oksana, please.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question about one of your latest slides about gradient Patterson square. Could we see it? Yeah. Oh, the previous. Whatever. Any of the slides with the square would go. Yeah,
yes,
here.
But it is graded Patterson square, yes?
Yes. Yes, so I would like to point at the pair of propositions K and G, which are connected with two lines. And if I understood that right, they are lines for contrariety and subcontrariety. Is this right?
Yes, you are right.
But that's impossible because contrariety means cannot be true together, but can be false together, while subcontrariety is can be true together, but cannot be false together. They are mutually exclusive. How could that be?
Yes, you are right. I agree with you, but this is a result in classical approach. In classical approach, I agree with you that the quantifier many behaves as subcontrary in Patterson approach, in classical approach. Yes, this is a result in classical approach. I agree with you, but in our approach, I explained that the quantifier many in our approach is defined using or based on the evaluated linguistic expression not small. And this fuzzy set starts in front of our middle point in our context, for example, if we are speaking about context. And it means in our approach, for example, 25 persons, if we are speaking or working with the group of 100 persons, it means 25 persons, for example, represents the quantifier many, and also, for example, 55 or 60 persons represent also the quantifier many. It means because our definition of the quantifier many is based on this special fuzzy sets. It means based on special evaluated linguistic expression, we can propose, or we can show, or we can find two models. It means we can find model in which the quantifier is contrary, and also another type of model in which this quantifier is subcontrary.
So I would like to clarify for myself. This does not mean that both relations are between propositions are present at the same time. It is rather different that it's in one model, it's one relation, and in the other model it's the other one. Well, I see, thank you. I would think I shouldn't give you advice, but it feels like if you want to have an algorithm, this particular case could interfere with your search.
Sorry, we don't hear you, Oksana.
Oh, I said that if you are searching for an algorithm, this pair could be an obstacle. Maybe if you reformulated it somehow for different models, if you separated them, maybe it would help somehow. Thank you. It was very interesting.
Thank you for your question.
Further questions, please. Dmitry, please.
Dmitry Veiza, я из Москвы. Oh, I am from Moscow. I am medical doctor. I am not logician. I am not mathematic. And I ask you to forgive my naivety in mathematics and logic. I would like to ask if the data of your logic are normalized between 0 and 1, maybe you can apply theory of probability in your logic and use in maybe in medicine for established diagnosis. Thank you.
Yes, for example, we are in the beginning of proposing of algorithm, and we would like to analyze natural data. Yes, of course. And I don't know if I have more time to explain details how we can, or how we know to transform natural data using special Guha method. to fuzzy data and to analyze this data using natural language?
Well, I would like to make one comment. There is significant difference between probability and truth. Probability is a measure of information about some, say, result of experiment which will proceed. And after the experiment proceeded, then no probability is at play. But what we are using is truth. So we are speaking about how much it is true that, for example, in the context from 0 to 1, 0.55 is big or not. So this is a different thing, and there is no experiment at play and no result of this experiment at play. It is simply characterization of property which is delineated vaguely. It is vague property, and therefore we cannot say if it is true or not. We can say that it is true in some degree, but we cannot speak about probability. We could speak what is the probability that in 5 minutes we meet somebody who is big or tall. This is possible. But when speaking about only the meaning of tall, then no probability is at play. Therefore, in our theory, we cannot use probability because it is logic. It is not probability, no experiments, no analysis of data.
Thank you.
May I have a very short question? May I?
Please.
Petra, you mentioned the Guha method. Do you apply Guha method in practice to obtain the data?
Yes, we tried. We applied Guha method. We tried to analyze natural data based on Guha method, and we found some fuzzy association. We found, for example, examples of fuzzy association with intermediate quantifiers. And but at this moment, this approach is at the beginning, and our idea is to extend our approach, our algorithm, and to continue in this approach, yes. But we obtained first results, and what was interesting, that in a real application, the quantifier many looks as subcontrary in our approach. It means if we analyze natural data, yes. But I think
very nice. And which were the sources? To which sources did you apply Guha method?
You mean Guha method, which was proposed by Professor Novak.
Sure, Hayek and so on. Yes. But you have to apply it to a source. So which were your sources?
But not now. At this moment, I have problem to understand with English. Please switch to Czech. What is sources?
Which were your input data?
Input data. No, at this moment, I don't know, because I collaborate with my colleague, but I think that it was real data from biology. As I remember, it was some kind of data about flowers. And we analyze petal and
you mean textual data, okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
May I ask another question?
Yes, please.
Why are you not extending this grade to the notion of contradictoriness or contrariness, contrariety, etc.? So I mean to say, it seems natural to ask the question, how much contradictory are these two statements? So the corner A and corner O
contradictory, yes,
are separated. They are contradictory to degree 1. but can we think of also contradictory to some degree?
If I understand very well your question, you mean that the quantifier A and O are contradictory, and also E and I, and it means their Lukasiewicz conjunction is the degrees of these quantifiers. Its Lukasiewicz conjunction is equal to 0.
Perhaps with Lukasiewicz conjunction, you will not be able to do it. With respect to other conjunctions, other T-norms might be possible.
I don't know why Lukasiewicz conjunction
because
doesn't work, because it's good operation.
It's a good operation, but it is it gives I mean A and not A. I mean, does it A and how is it? I mean, I don't remember what will be the truth value of A and not A in Lukasiewicz.
You mean how this operation is defined?
No. How is the ultimate result? Say you take a fuzzy predicate A and take its negation not A, and now by Lukasiewicz conjunction you take the sentence A and not A.
Yes.
What will be its truth value in general? Will it be 0 always?
If, for example, A will be true in 1, then O must be true in 0. If we are speaking in classical logic.
That holds in Lukasiewicz conjunction.
And Lukasiewicz conjunction is equal to 0. If A is 1 and O is 0, it's equal to 0.
Yeah. So that means with the help of Lukasiewicz conjunction, I think it is difficult to make model of the notion of contradictory to a degree. But this can be done with the help of other T-norms.
May I add some comment?
Yes.
With Lukasiewicz or any kind of strong conjunction in any kind of fuzzy logic, the conjunction of proposition and its negation is always 0. This is the reason why the tertium non datur or law of contradiction is preserved in fuzzy logic.
Yeah, but that really becomes a bit counterintuitive in the context of fuzzy predicates.
No, it is not counterintuitive because we have simply at least two kinds of conjunction. We can apply another T-norm.
That is mathematically true, but if we apply our intuition, somebody is small and somebody is not small. If you take conjunction, it should be always 0 is not intuitively permissible, because that goes against the very idea of vagueness.
We can argue about that. I simply do not agree. And when using minimum conjunction, which is a second candidate for this, then of course we can have degrees of contradictoriness. But frankly speaking, we were thinking about such possibilities and we were working on that, but the results were poor and so far we didn't get farther. Simply for us it is not interesting, at least so far, to apply another kind of conjunction than strong conjunction, which in Lukasiewicz logic is Lukasiewicz conjunction.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We are working more than 1.5 hours. is there a desire to continue discussion, or we can stop at this moment? Or maybe there are some persons who want to ask some further questions.
If possible, I'd like to.
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. About the same slide, it looks as though we could deduce some more relations that are than those which are mentioned on this slide. For example, since subalternation is transitive here, I believe, we could say that if, say, T is true, then I is true, and therefore E is false, and all its subalterns are false too. So we could also draw lines representing contrarieties and subcontrariety between
A, B, with A and B.
For example, between A and B, and so on. And I think it would also help you with your search for algorithms. And I guess, I'm not sure, maybe you could also deduce some more contradiction relations, which you discussed just now. And also, you might want, I'm not sure if you will, but you might want to draw one more relation, which is not here, the relation of unconnectedness, or you can call it independency. That is the absence of any logical relation. This could also clarify your picture. So you could either add some more lines or show that no more lines should be present.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. I agree with you, of course. We can prove another relation, for example, between A and B, between P and E, and many others, for example, between K and O and G and I. Yes, these properties, I presented these results in our full paper, which was devoted to the graded Patterson square of oppositions. And for this presentation, I didn't go to more detail, but thank you very much for your question. And as you explain me or recall me that these properties can be useful for interpretation of natural data for our algorithm. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask you for the full text of the paper? I would be very interested.
Yes, yes. Okay, I will send you my full paper, yes, by email.
Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. I'll put it in the chat, my email. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, then we can stop discussion, and I would like to thank Petra for nice presentation and for nice answers to numerous questions. William, thank you very much too for your help. It seems to me it was a great discussion, and at this moment we can stop our session. Thank you to everybody.
I thank you, everybody, and I thank you for really very fruitful and interesting discussion. In fact, I have never experienced such a long and productive discussion in any of talks I have ever heard. So thank you very much. It was really also very encouraging and interesting for us.
Bye.
Yes,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you. Also, I thank you very much for our discussion.